Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley St. Bros, and today we're going to be talking about the interesting life of Olaudah Equiano, written by Olaudah Equiano. Um, this is a very interesting narrative. Now, before we go into summary analysis of this work, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and/or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. There's a lot to uncover here. There's a lot to unpack here. Um, well, pretty much what we're told within this work, what happens within this work is we get Olaudah Equiano. He's coming from Nigeria in Africa. And basically, it's a narrative of how he was in Africa, how he was born in Africa, how he was taken, kidnapped, sold into slavery, how he leaves Africa, and literally how he goes everywhere from America to all types like the West Indies, all types of islands and places, and he gives us our experiences there. Throughout this narrative, he gets sold to many different types of people. He has a very interesting life. I mean, this is why this is the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano. He tells us about how he was sold. He experienced the 7 Years' War. He experienced the brutality of slavery. He experienced some of the darkest things in slavery. Now, living in America, in my own personal life, you've read about slavery, you've heard about slavery, American slavery, and the transatlantic American slave trade. Um, now, one thing I'll say about this is that you hear all the beatings, the murders, the killings of slave masters and their slaves. But one thing that Olaudah Equiano talks about within his narrative is that the not only the beatings and the horrific things that happen to Africans, but also the abuse, the sexual abuse, the rape, the depravity that that took place within slavery. He talks about how in one segment in one segment of his life where he experienced how certain white owners or white masters or people who were in the trade business where they would sexually abuse, rape, women coming from Africa. And also, he even said that sometimes they abused, rape, and sexually abused little girls that were, not even 10, not even 9 years old. And so you can imagine it was the most grueling, wicked, and evil things to have witnessed. Because again, slaves did not have any rights. They did not have anything guarding them. There was no 911. There was no any type of earthly institution that protected slaves, and so the people that were mastered over them, they could do whatever they want. I mean, there's one instance where he said ship owners or slave traders threw slaves off the ship to collect the insurance. So they were killing slaves for money. They were abusing, sexually abusing, raping, pillaging, beating, murdering. I mean, all types of depravity, wickedness, evil, horrors were, one human were doing to one another. And sometimes he said that these men, because this was not women, these were white men, um, Europeans, Americans, you name it. They were out at sea alone, and they had all the power, and they could do well, pretty much whatever they want. And sometimes they would even go against one another, and sometimes the results would be quite deadly. So Olaudah Equiano tells us all of these accounts of Africans coming from all types of countries and tribes and parts of Africa, their journeys throughout different places. He talks about Europe and England and how he was in England at some point, and how he was in America, how he was in Philadelphia. So he moved. He wasn't a slave that just got because one common narrative is that slaves came from Africa. They came into the U.S. and they went down south and plantations and things like that. And that's certainly true, but that's not Olaudah Equiano's experience of it all. For him, he was traded from person to person to person, sold from person to person. But yes, he had some beatings. Yes, he suffered some things in regards to racism and all the horrors that come with being a part of the slave trade as a slave. But for the most part, he encountered some good masters that trusted him, that thought he was a man of good character. In England, he got baptized. He became a Christian. There were some ladies that helped him accept the Christian faith. And it goes on from there. He had some masters that weren't beating him, that trusted him with their business livelihoods, and he helped them make a lot of money. He was very responsible, very an honorable man. He helped his masters at several points to make a lot of money. Ultimately, he had a master by the name of King that he bought his freedom from, and he reached an agreement with his master. The last master he had was King, and pretty much King pretty much told him, if you can pay me what I paid for you, I'll set you free. And that's he saves his money because that's he becomes a trader, trading for goods. I mean, there's some parts of the narrative that's kind of tough to comprehend, because at some point he was working for his master in selling slaves, because I mean his master, he had several masters that were in the business of moving slaves and moving cargo and moving all types of things, and that also included the selling of slaves. But the thing is, we can't count that too much against him, because he was a slave in the possession of a master. So whatever his master said, that's what he did. I mean, he was a slave. He wasn't willingly selling slaves or participating willingly. He just had to take orders, because if you didn't take orders, you pretty much got severely beaten or killed. So he played it smart. He sold things here and there. He traded here and there. He learned how to speak English. Um, he learned about the Christian religion. He became a Christian, and ultimately he bought his freedom. And after buying his freedom, well, he traveled around. He enlisted himself in different parts. Sometimes he enlisted himself in things for money, so that he can get money, so that he can take care of himself. He tried to go back to Africa as a missionary to spread Christianity, but that didn't work out for him. He couldn't go because of most likely racism, well, that was prevalent at that time. So Olaudah Equiano, he faces all of that. All of that takes place. Um, Ultimately, he does settle in England. He becomes a barber. He was also, he knew how to cut hair, so that's also interesting. But he does go on a lot of travels, and as a human, he witnessed a lot of horrible. Because he says there's some things that happened to slaves that he doesn't even want to talk about. From beatings to cuttings to rapes to because in terms of slavery, I mean, most people gloss over this. For African women that were taken from Africa, I mean, you some of them, I would say, the ones, think about human behavior and think about how humans behave. The way that Olaudah Equiano talks about this is that some women were abused sexually, some women were raped, and he says these men had no restriction whatsoever. They could do whatever they want. So they beat the men, uh, they abused them, they forced them to work, and the women, they did the same thing, but also, if somebody wanted to do something to them, they could have. And he said age didn't matter. They could be adults, they could be teenagers, young little children. He said it's the most horrific things that you could imagine. He even said that one of his masters one time had to fire some men because they were doing such things that were so depraved and evil that I mean, it's just, you couldn't be around it. Um, yeah, but ultimately he does buy his freedom, and he spent most of his time in England. He spends some time in England. He moves around quite a bit. This does get published. This narrative of his, this life, his own. I guess we can even say his own autobiography. Um, so it's very interesting to get an account from a slave about the whole slave endeavor from Africa to America to Europe, to several different types of islands and locations on the planet. So, in terms of deep meaning, in terms of analysis here, there's a lot to take in. I mean, Olaudah Equiano, his character saved him. I think his character allowed him to find some white people in that time that took pity upon him, that trusted him, that allowed him to survive. And also, one other thing about him is his character, his personality. He made friends both white and black, um, and that especially during that time, because there were some several different circumstances that he talked about where a white man, a white master would do something so egregious, so crazy to a slave that a slave would try to kill the white man, and then get caught, and then they get killed. He talked about there's this instance where supposedly a black man um, uh, slept with a white prostitute, and he says even though the white prostitute, in society, there's no respect. Being a prostitute is not dignified, not classy, not holy, not people. That's not something you bring into the light, right? It's something that's shredded in darkness, and people shame it, people condemn it, and no one glorifies it. He says that even the least of the white man's woman, which is the prostitute, if a black man dares to touch her, he'll get killed for it. But he says that in the same way, they rape and do all these things to, you know, African women, and nothing gets done about it. So he's a man that had to live and witness and watch all these horrific things being done to people just like him. But he didn't really have power to do anything about it. If he get intervened, that's just his life. He'll just get killed. Um, so yeah, that's what happened. That was the life of Olaudah Equiano. His character, um, his background, his faith, his religion, um, his motivation to be free, his motivation to help other people. Um, it's something to take within. It's like, depending on your character, depending on who you are, the worst situations, the most horrible situations in life, you can overcome them depending on who you are, what character you have. Because if he was a person that was revengeful, that was ready to if you disrespect him, he was ready to fight. His masters wouldn't have been so kind to him and trustworthy to him, and he wouldn't have not been able to buy his own freedom from his master, his last master. So that's all I have to say about this work. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.